Thanks very much for joining us. You are watching World Report on CRTV News. The headlines. Americans are heading to the polls to make their choice between Republican President Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has provisionally won a third term in office with 94.27% of the vote, according to the Electoral Commission. Good afternoon and thanks for watching World Report on CRTV News with me, Jamila Ketzalat. As you heard in one of our lead stories, Americans are heading to the polls to make their choice between Republican President Donald Trump and the Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Some 100 million votes were already cast by mail and early voting before Election Day, and the Trump rallied Monday in Kenosha, the Wisconsin city at the center of a racial protest this summer. In a final bid to prove the polls wrong and retain the White House, while his challenger Joe Biden predicted victory and told Americans to take back to democracy. Gladys Asu has the roundup of yesterday's last campaign day.
Mr. Biden campaigned in Pennsylvania and Ohio as Mr. Trump toured the voting battlegrounds of Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. National polls suggest a firm lead for Mr. Biden in today's election, but his lead is narrower in the handful of states that could decide the result. More than 98 million people have already cast their ballots in early voting, putting the country on course for its highest turnout in a century. In the U.S. election, voters decide state-level contests rather than an overall single national one. To be elected president, a candidate must win at least 270 votes in what is called the Electoral College. Each U.S. state gets a certain number of votes partly based on its population, and there are a total of 538 up for grabs. This system explains why it is possible for a candidate to win the most votes nationally, like Hillary Clinton did in 2016, but still lost the election. Today's vote comes amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The U.S. has recorded more cases and more deaths than any other country worldwide, reporting more than 81,000 new infections on Sunday alone. As the nation counts down the hours to the vote, there are fears that pockets of post-election violence could break out. Businesses in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and in New York City have been seen boarding up their premises due to concerns about unrest.
And according to political analysts, the U.S. presidential election will likely be decided in 5 key states, namely Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Florida. Democrats are hoping to avoid a repeat of 2016 when votes in just 3 states swung the election. Let's get the reactions of some Americans compiled by NBC.
I think that's the most important thing. I think clearly Trump's policies make more sense.
Here in Pennsylvania, a lot of it is, as it is everywhere, the COVID and the handling of it. I actually, for one, recently lost my job because of it.
And when you're coming out of a pandemic situation like we've had in our economy, for example, raising taxes and changing energy supplies don't make any sense at all.
We are in the center of what was the Cambria Iron Works, which started operations here in Johnstown in 1854. This place was a geological treasure trove. The hill behind us actually had 3 alternating layers of iron ore and coal. You had mines throughout that entire hillside. It was considered to be one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the entire United States.
And as you rightly heard, polls are open since morning. across the U.S., marking the start of Election Day. And our guest is a political analyst from New Jersey. She is Florence Akono. Thanks very much for granting us the interview. Climate change has emerged as a major factor for people in the United States casting their votes since morning. Are there any ways through which the election could affect climate change?
That he wants clean air and water for all America, his action and words don't match. He bailed on the Paris Agreement, reduced funding for NASA programs for improving the environment, and weakened the clause of Endangering Species Act 1970. He also refused to take action against the fossil fuel industry, making it clear that his goals are more economical than environmental. On the other hand, Biden has claimed the exact opposite. He wants to join the Paris Agreement once again, abolish fossil fuel use, protect the endangered species, and raise NASA funds to protect the environment.
How will a Trump or Biden presidency affect the defense issues in Europe?
The U.S. has always been a great supporter of NATO and security all over Europe. However, under the Trump administration, Europe has seen a diminishing aid from the U.S. in finance and workforce, resulting in an imbalance in the region. Without support from America, NATO forces have faced great turmoil, and Russia has been advancing territories like already occupied Ukraine and quasi-annexed Donbass. However, Biden has claimed to restore the balance and power once he gets to the round office. If Biden wins the election, there is a chance of better stability in the European continent.
U.S. presidential election will likely be decided in 5 key states, namely Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Florida. What are the dynamics at play in these battlegrounds?
Michigan. The battle in Michigan is expected to be a close one. For now, the scales can tip in anyone's favor. There has been increased support for Biden than Trump. Florida. Democrats have over 180,000 more ballots than the Republicans in the state of Florida. They have a clear advantage and may continue the leading streak. Wisconsin. The state is one of the major battlegrounds of the election 2020. The race is expected to be a close one. However, people seem to favor Trump over Biden.
You agree
Pennsylvania.
with me?
With Trump putting stricter laws in place for the mail-in ballots, the decrease in absentee voters count can tip the scale in his favor. However, people in general seem more supportive of Biden's plan.
And you agree with me that
Georgia.
Joe Biden hammered Trump over his handling of the COVID-19, which he called almost criminal, in an earlier speech to supporters following the country's worst week for new cases. Do you think that Democrats have a better plan of handling the COVID-19 pandemic?
Trump's policies for the COVID-19 pandemic has been quite clear, which can be summed up to let's close our eyes till it passes. With the death toll rising each day, people are becoming increasingly uncertain of their future. On the other hand, Biden has promised a more serious take on the subject that has claimed over 200,000 Americans in the past few months. He has claimed that as soon as the vaccine is ready, everyone should take it. However, with stricter policy in place and precaution measures, will that combat the pandemic? Wait to be seen.
Thanks very much, Florence Akono, for granting us the interview. Let me remind our viewers that you are a political analyst from New Jersey. And for more American voters than ever, mail-in voting is an option this year, but rules depend on where you live. Requests for absentee and mail-in ballots have increased across the United States, and they have adjusted their policies to give voters a safe alternative to voting in person amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to throw more light on this, we now take you over to East Carolina University, where Professor Victor Mbarika is standing by. He is the president of the Board of Trustees of the ICT University. Thanks very much, Prof, for granting us the interview. Well, do you think that postal voting will be transparent?
Absolutely. Political ads on Facebook or any social media do affect voting outcome because, today is the information age. As an ICT professor, I strongly believe in the use of social media, and a lot of young people that have just reached voting age get most of their news from social media. They get most of their political information from social media. This generation does not read newspapers or even watch TV or listen to the radio like the generations before them. So absolutely, Facebook and other social media do have a major influence in getting out information that would get an individual voting to make their decision. However, they have overstepped their boundaries. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, many of these big names are more left-leaning groups that support more democratic candidates and absolutely hate Trump. I mean, there is no doubt about it. They don't like Trump. And so even when you see on some of these social media, if you are a conservative and you put certain ideas on these social media, they can even block you. They can suspend your account. And so unfortunately, I think the social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and so on, they have made a huge mistake to involve themselves in politics. They should stay out of politics. They were created for the purpose of giving a platform for people to express themselves, provide information, share information, and so on. They were not created with the purpose of policing information, and that is what they are doing largely to the benefit of democratic or left-leaning groups. And that is rather unfortunate that they are losing the focus of why they were created. If they continue in that trend, I can predict in the next 5 to 10 years, they will lose a lot of business, and you will start seeing new social media groups that are more balanced and things like that.
And that was instead the answer on the announcement on social media, which says Facebook will not be accepting new political ads during the election. Do you think political ads on Facebook and Twitter will affect the election? And can you tell us if postal voting is going to be transparent?
Hi, Kat. It's always an honor to be on your show, and I want to thank you and your colleagues at CRTV for always treating me very nicely when I appear on your shows. This is a very good question, and of course, the coronavirus pandemic has affected many things in our lives. So life is not like it's ever been before. None of us has ever seen a situation like this before, and so everything is being done in a new way. And so the advocates for mail-in voting, I think they did have a good reason in that hardly anyone was sure whether people will be able to go vote in person. I've already voted. I did vote in person, and there was some good social distancing. But also, you have to give some, I guess, credit to those that are really critical of mail-in voting. I can see their point of view. which is also my point of view in that the postal system is not ready or was not ready for transparency in the mail-in voting system. It is not me reporting this. You know, many news media have already reported several people, postal workers that were arrested for throwing away votes that they thought were beneficial to Donald Trump. And so some of them are in prison right now because of that. So that answers your question directly. It cannot be transparent because the right measures have not been put in place to ensure there is such transparency. So President Donald Trump is right to be skeptical about this, and many Republican voters are absolutely skeptical about mail-in voting, and that's why the turnout for the election on election day will be very high in terms of Republican turnout compared to Democrats that, I mean, many Democrats have already voted by mail. Maybe some years down the road, the mail-in voting system will be improved. I mean, another thing you can think about, with mail-in voting, okay, you get this the paper to cast your ballot, and you can get it through your mail. Somebody receives it at home. Anybody can vote for you without you even knowing. They can complete that form and they put it back in the mail, and people may think it's you, but it's not you. So there are a lot of things that have not been done, or a lot of measures that have not been taken to ensure that fraud is minimized. So I am definitely with President Trump on this, to be skeptical about the transparency of mail-in voting.
And as you earlier said, a lot of postal voters have been arrested, and there has been a lot of criticisms against Republican President Donald Trump on NBC and Fox News. Do you have anything to say on that?
Oh my goodness, what are some of the criticisms made against Trump? There are way too many. Much of the media out there have decided to be against Trump in one way or another. It amazes me that if you watch like CNN or MSNBC, this is no secret. 99.999% of the time, you will never ever hear anything positive about Donald Trump on those TV stations. Why? I mean, they have become advocates for democratic or left-leaning ideas. And it's rather unfortunate. I really think we miss those days of Peter Jennings and the Tom Brokos that were more balanced in their ways of doing things. We need media outlets that are more balanced in looking at both sides. Yes, even Fox News is more biased towards conservative ideas or Republican ideas, but at least several journalists on Fox News, you will hear them criticize Donald Trump. Okay, not all the journalists on Fox News are like, okay, yes, Donald Trump is right in everything. I find a lot more balance with Fox News compared to like CNN. So there are lots of criticism, but probably one of the biggest ones, many people want to criticize him. They talk about his style of talking, the way he talks to people, the way he talks to leaders around the world. Well, I mean, I myself, I don't sometimes like some of the vulgarity he uses and some of the things which I would not want my children to listen to. However, he's an honest man. He's straight to the point. He speaks his mind. He reminds me of a typical old man in Africa who will have nothing to lose, but they will just speak what comes to their mind. I think people don't like the fact that he's not a typical politician. He is a businessman that has joined politics and is running politics like a business. I have absolutely no problem with that. I absolutely admire his leadership style. I don't approve the way he talks all the time, but admire his leadership style. And all those criticisms will keep coming. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump does. The left-leaning media, which is most of the media, would hardly ever see anything good about this man.
Thanks very much, Professor Victor Mbaricha, for granting us the interview. Let me remind our viewers that you are the president of the board of the ICTU in the East Carolina. We stay in the U.S., where relations with China have hit their lowest point in decades, primarily amid a trade dispute. Donald Trump and the Democrat candidate Joe Biden have a contrasting approach to foreign relations. Details in the following report.
America first. From day one, Donald Trump vowed to take a tougher line with U.S. enemies. A stance reflected in some caustic Twitter exchanges with North Korea's leader. But in a move that stunned the world, the bellicose rhetoric soon gave way to an historic rapprochement. Over the course of his presidency, Trump has met Kim Jong-un 3 times. That's an accelerated diplomatic drive that Joe Biden would be unlikely to continue. It delivered more in the way of warm words than North Korean nuclear disarmament.
I think our whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula is it's going to be a very much different situation than it has in the past. We both want to do something. We both are going to do something. And we have developed a very special bond.
In contrast, under Trump, U.S. relations with China have hit their lowest level in decades, primarily amid a trade dispute. But Trump's blaming of China for America's coronavirus woes has heightened tensions, and trade talks are now frozen. Biden says he'd continue to pressure Beijing, but through a multilateral approach involving U.S. allies. But it's perhaps over Russia that the two men differ most strongly. Trump has seemed reluctant to criticize President Putin at times, even when U.S. intelligence concluded the Kremlin had interfered in the 2016 election. Biden has signaled he would take a much firmer line with Moscow.
How you doing, man? The fact is that I've gone head-to-head with Putin and made it clear to him we're not going to take any of his stuff. He's Putin's puppy.
But Biden appears unlikely to reverse one of the signature foreign policy developments of the Trump presidency, the transfer of Washington's Israel embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He would, however, seek to reset America's ties with its allies, many of whom were heavily criticized by Trump. Ultimately, for the average U.S. voter, foreign relations are rarely an election priority, even more so now with an unprecedented health and economic crisis at home.
On to something else now. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has provisionally won a third term in office with 94.27% of the vote, according to the Electoral Commission, after a bitter election that sparked deadly violence and was boycotted by opposition voters. Gladys Asu tells us more.
As of this Tuesday morning, following results proclaimed by the Independent Electoral Commission on Monday night, Côte d'Ivoire has announced that current President Alassane Ouattara, at 78 years of age, has been re-elected for a controversial third term in office after garnering 94.27% of the vote in the first round of a participation rate of 53.90%. As the main opposition camps, who still perceive Ouattara's candidacy as a constitutional coup d'etat, choose to boycott the election in civil disobedience. The opposition camps did not recognize the preliminary results of the election, as they called on Monday for the formation of a civil transition to hold what they believe will be fair and transparent elections. The political atmosphere in the country has already been tense and volatile, and over 30 people have already lost their lives in election-related campaign violence. Following this presidential pronouncement, many Ivorians fear a repeat of the post-electoral crisis of 2010, which resulted in the deaths of around 3,000 people.
25 minutes past 4 p.m. in Yaoundé. If you are just joining us, you are watching World Report on CRTV News. Onto our feature page, since Donald Trump's accession to presidency in 2016, relations with the European Union have often been turbulent, not least over trade. Unreported Europe investigates how the outcome of the U.S. election may affect tariffs and taxes which have flown in either direction during the last 4 years.
Set in between the Burgundy and Beaujolais regions, this wine-producing and trading firms sends a quarter of its exports to the American market. But business got harder a year ago when French, German and Spanish wine exporters were hit by a new 25% tax on their exports to the United States. Preserving market shares in the US was crucial in the face of competition.
We made a decision that hit us in the wallet to lower our prices to offset the taxes applied by the United States. That's run into several €100,000. That's a lot to us. It's our profit for the year. We sell for nothing in the United States now, so we hope there'll be a way out of this, but we're not sure.
Even if the Democratic Party candidate wins the election in the United States?
Obviously, a change of president would be a good sign, but whatever happens, the situation isn't going to resolve itself in the short term.
A number of other European food and drink products were targeted. Exporters are the collateral victims of a long-running battle between Airbus and its American competitor Boeing. Ruling that European subsidies to Airbus were illegal, the World Trade Organization gave Donald Trump the green light a year ago to apply punitive tariffs worth some $7.5 billion. The response came last September. The WTO authorized the EU to impose tariffs on US goods worth $4 billion in retaliation for illegal subsidies to Boeing. Donald Trump had summarized his perception of US-EU commercial relations 2 years ago.
Who's your biggest competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. They've really taken advantage of us.
The statement came shortly after the European Union imposed new taxes on US steel and aluminum exports, as well as a number of iconic American products. A tit-for-tat reaction to the American tariffs imposed earlier on European steel and aluminum products.
America never surrenders.
The tug of war is not expected to lose momentum if Donald Trump wins the 3rd of November elections. If negotiations can't solve trade disputes, the European Union has promised to take action.
Our trade and investment relationship remains the largest and most important in the world. It's important to continue to engage, to continue to develop our transatlantic relation, because when EU and US works together, we can also be a force for the good in the world. But we had also been clear that when US is taking unilateral steps, EU is going to respond in a proportionate way. So we do not intend to escalate the situation, but we have to defend ourselves.
Despite Donald Trump's punitive tax policies, the European Union's trade surplus for goods with the United States has in fact consistently risen since he came into power in January 2017. So has the American goods trade deficit with the EU, reaching a peak at the end of last year. A new offensive is expected if the outgoing president wins a second term. Threats of a 25% tax on European car imports loom since European leaders announced they would impose digital service taxes on American tech giants. The plans were suspended until the end of the year, the deadline for an agreement to be found. The issue is just one of the contentious topics that are not expected to dissolve, whichever the outcome of the elections, say experts on both sides of the Atlantic. Can Europeans expect a better deal from Joe Biden than from Donald Trump?
I think the overall tone of the relations would improve dramatically under a Biden administration. But there are other issues which are going to be very, very difficult. I mean, this digital tax issue, if anything, the Democrats are more beholden to the Silicon Valley digital giants like Google and Facebook than the Republicans are. Boeing Airbus is not going to go away. And if you look at Joe Biden's platform, he has promised the most aggressive sort of Buy American policy that we have ever seen out of a president. I think you're going to see a very inward-looking United States.
The Democrat candidate has made clear that domestic concerns will take priority over new trade deals, but there is hope for relief on tariff wars and global cooperation.
I'm quite convinced that Joe Biden will try to work with the Europeans to salvage what can be salvaged from the WTO. And there's the bilateral relation with Europe. And there I think Biden has a sort of a free pro-trade view, and I could well see us making some progress. And certainly when it comes to climate issues and carbon border adjustment, which is also a trade issue, I think we will find some deal with Joe Biden.
Question strong again.
We remain open for business, open for free and fair trade, but on the other hand, we need to become more assertive in defending our interests, our values. We need to strengthen our trade defense and enforcement toolkit, and that's exactly what we are doing right now.
So I think the lesson is that the EU needs to stand up firmly for its own interests on trade. I think it's actually done that quite well in the last 4 years, which is why the Trump administration did not make as much progress on its complaints with Europe as it might have. But I think that will continue into the next 4 years, regardless of who becomes the next president.
Interesting story there. Let's take quickly a breather, and when we come back, we give you a recap of our top stories. Americans are at the polls today to make their choice between Republican President Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Joe Biden. They will be selecting a leader to steer a nation battered by a surging pandemic that has killed more than 231,000 people and caused millions others to lose their jobs. So 100 million votes were already cast by mail and early voting before Election Day. And the Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has provisionally won a third term in office with 94.27% of the vote, according to the Electoral Commission. On this edition of World Report. Thanks for your kind attention. Experience the American presidential election on CRTV News this November 3 at exactly 9 p.m. A special edition on the Biden-Trump face-off, specialist opinion and updates of the vote in Uncle Sam's Land will be brought to you live with Evelyn Owona-Isomba and Charles Ebune. Take the appointment.